It started with a whisper, a quiet one muffled through the crack of my son's bedroom door, just loud enough to snag on the edge of my attention as I passed by with a folded pile of fresh towels. Emily's voice, soft, hesitant. I still think about it. Every night. Jason responded sharper, quicker. We said we wouldn't bring it up again. I stopped walking. My fingers tightened around the towels. I know I shouldn't have lingered, but something in the tone, that edge of grief, froze me. Emily again, quieter this time. I didn't think it would feel like this. Jason muttered something inaudible. Then a pause. Then the sound of a zipper, maybe a bag, a suitcase. My heart was thudding now, too fast for the moment. I kept moving. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What a parent's instinct sharpens with age. It's not a superpower, but it's close. And in that instant, I knew the shape of the silence. It felt like morning. I sat up in bed and thought of the baby booties I'd crocheted 2 winters ago, just in case. They're still in my closet. Untouched, hopeful, dusty. Jason and Emily have been married 3 years. They're both 30, both successful. She works in design, he in software. And for as long as I can remember, Jason told me he wanted a family. Every Thanksgiving I'd ask, half joking of course, "So any little Whitlows coming?" He'd laugh, wrap an arm around Emily and say, "Soon, Ma, soon." But soon kept stretching into silence. And now something was different. The next morning, Emily looked pale at breakfast. She barely touched her toast. Jason kept scrolling through his phone. They didn't speak. I made tea, sat down across from them. "You two sleep okay?" Emily blinked. "Yeah, just tired." Jason didn't even look up. I smiled politely. Inside, my stomach twisted. I wanted to believe it was something small. An argument. Work stress. But I've lived long enough to recognize the grief that makes your skin feel tight and your heart feel swollen. That afternoon, I was tidying up, doing laundry, something mindless, something distracting, when I noticed Emily's handbag on the bench by the hallway. It had fallen open. Not unusual. A corner of a receipt was sticking out. I wasn't going to look, I swear. But the name on the header caught my eye. Mildred Women's Health Center. I froze. I knew that name. Everyone in our town did. It wasn't just a clinic. It was a specific kind of clinic, the kind where decisions aren't made lightly. I pulled it out. The receipt was dated 10 days ago. The description didn't mince words. Voluntary termination. 9 weeks gestation. My vision blurred. My knees nearly gave. I sat on the armrest of the nearby couch and stared at it. That single slip of paper screamed louder than anything I'd ever heard. They were pregnant. I was going to be a grandmother. And now, I wasn't. Dinner that evening was quiet. Too quiet. I made meatloaf, Jason's favorite. He barely ate 2 bites. Emily kept her head down, fiddling with her fork. I looked at them both. These 2 people I had cared for, welcomed into my home, given space to. I could hardly look Emily in the eye without my chest caving in. I couldn't even speak to Jason. He was my baby. And he let me dream. He let me hope. Knowing what I knew now, every laugh, maybe soon, every smile when I mentioned grandkids, it all felt like a cruel joke. I excused myself before dessert. My mouth was too dry to swallow. I sat on the edge of my bed that night and cried like I hadn't cried in years. Not just because of the abortion, not just because there would be no baby, but because they had buried the truth like it was shame. Because they didn't trust me. Because my own son, my own flesh kept me in the dark while the future I'd been clinging to was quietly erased. I don't know how long I sat there holding the receipt like it could answer the questions racing through my skull. Had they planned to tell me, was it Emily's decision? Or Jason's? Was the pregnancy a mistake? Or was I the mistake, the one they wanted to keep out of it all? At some point, I folded the receipt and placed it in my nightstand drawer. I wasn't ready to confront them yet. Not until I could stand without shaking. But the betrayal had already taken root. It pulsed in my ribs. It burned behind my eyes. And worst of all, it whispered one thought I couldn't silence: maybe. Maybe I didn't know my son at all. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen holding a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, watching the daffodils sway in the breeze outside. The garden looked peaceful, oblivious to the storm curling inside me. I could hear the wind nudging the chimes Jason had hung years ago on the porch. A soft tinkling like a lullaby from another life. I used to tell Jason that daffodils were stubborn flowers. They bloomed even after the harshest winters, as if to say, "We're still here." He loved planting them with me as a boy, digging into the soft spring dirt with his small hands humming tunelessly. His laugh back then, it was like sunshine. He was gentle, tender-hearted, sensitive in the ways that made a mother ache with both pride and worry. And yet here I was, gripping a coffee mug like it was a lifeline, trying to reconcile that sweet boy with the man who had just stood in my kitchen and confirmed indirectly, but unmistakably, that there was once a baby. That now there wasn't. And I wasn't supposed to know. Jason and Emily had been married for 3 years. They were stable, established, well-loved in their community. He worked in software remote and she in design for a boutique firm. They had a good home, no debt, a support system. So why would they do this? Why would they make this decision and then bury it in silence? I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. God knows I've done my share of regrettable things in life. But some decisions, they aren't just mistakes. They're turning points. And this one had carved a fault line through my entire sense of family. I sat at the kitchen table staring into my untouched coffee, letting the quiet stretch longer than it should have. I could hear Jason moving upstairs, water running. Emily's faint footsteps. No conversation. Just space between them. That told me everything. I had always dreamed of becoming a grandmother. Not in a desperate, overbearing way. I wasn't the type to corner them at holidays or send cryptic baby gift texts. But I saved things. I imagined things. The small cradle Jason had slept in as a baby. It was still in the attic, polished, carefully wrapped. The lullabies I used to sing, I kept humming them when I gardened just to keep them alive. The second bedroom upstairs had stayed untouched for years, not because I needed the space, but because I kept imagining filling it. Soft curtains, a reading chair, a place for a child to dream. All of that had lived in my heart like a candle I refused to blow out. Until now. Jason walked into the kitchen just after 10, yawning. His hair was disheveled, his eyes tired. "Morning," he said casually, reaching for the cereal. I said nothing. He paused, turned to look at me. "You okay?" I looked up slowly. "You tell me." He blinked. "What's that supposed to mean?" I tilted my head. "Was Emily pregnant?" He stilled. I saw the tiniest flinch. His hand tightened around the edge of the cereal box. "What? You heard me?" He looked away. "Why are you asking that?" I stood up, walked to the counter. "Because I found a receipt in her purse. From Mildred Women's Health. From 10 days ago." He didn't answer. His throat moved as he swallowed hard. "That's not a dermatologist," I said, voice trembling. "That's not a dentist. That's not a spa." He dropped the box. It hit the counter with a dull thud. "You shouldn't have gone through her things," he said. I didn't. It was sticking out. "You shouldn't have read it. You shouldn't have hidden it." The words came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't hold them anymore. He lowered his gaze. "It's complicated, Ma. Try me." He shifted his weight, leaning against the counter like he couldn't hold himself up anymore. "She was 9 weeks. It wasn't planned." She freaked out. "We talked. We decided it wasn't the right time." I took a breath. "We decided. Or you convinced her. That's not fair." "Isn't it?" "She wasn't ready." She said it. She cried about it. I told her I'd support her either way. But we weren't thinking about kids. We're not there yet. But you told me you were trying. He winced. I said we were talking about it. No. You said soon. You said you were ready. He looked at me like a child caught in a lie he couldn't unwind. Things changed. Yes, they did. I could barely speak. She was carrying a child. My grandchild. We weren't ready. You were. You just didn't want to be. He stood there, jaw clenched. It's not your business, Mom. That sentence. Those 4 words. They sliced through me like ice. I raised Jason alone after his father passed. I gave up promotions, moved across states when his asthma needed drier weather, read books on behavioral therapy, when he struggled in school, held him, when he cried, celebrated when he succeeded. And now suddenly I wasn't even entitled to the truth. Not your business. I felt the room spin. I sat down not because I was weak, but because something inside me had crumbled. He didn't say another word. Just turned and left the kitchen. Emily was in the guest room. I heard her shut the door quietly behind her. For a brief second I almost knocked. But I didn't. I didn't know what I'd say. Didn't know if I wanted to comfort her or confront her. I returned to my room and pulled out the little baby sweater I'd been knitting in secret. It wasn't finished. Pale green soft cotton, gender neutral, just in case. I held it for a long time. Then I folded it gently and placed it in the bottom drawer of my dresser. Buried. That evening, the house was silent. No one talked. No one watched TV. No one laughed. I made dinner again out of habit, not hunger. No one came down. I sat at the kitchen table, ate in silence, and poured a glass of red wine from the bottle I'd saved for the announcement day, the one I thought was coming. And I let the grief rise quietly, privately, the way older women are taught to grieve. Not with screams, not with tears, but with long silences. And wine. And a candle burning on the windowsill that no one would ask about. Because now I knew. There had been a child. A chance. A dream. And I had been erased from it start to finish. Not by fate. Not by loss. But by choice. By the very people I had once believed would carry my legacy forward. The next morning, I found myself moving through the house like a stranger. The walls felt closer, the air heavier. Even the clock on the mantel seemed louder, like it was trying to fill the silence with something other than grief. I told myself I'd stop thinking about it just for the morning. But grief doesn't work like that. It doesn't wait for your permission. It creeps in when your guard is down, in the way your hands hover over the sink longer than usual, or how you suddenly forget what room you walked into. I decided to take out the trash, mostly to give my body something to do. The bin in the kitchen was full, and the outdoor cans needed dragging to the curb. I bundled it up, feeling that same old ache in my knees as I bent down and made my way outside, and that's when I saw it. A smaller white bag had been tucked deep into the outside bin, different from the others, double-bagged, sealed tightly. Something about it struck me as intentional. I pulled it out, hesitating. It's trash, Margaret. Let it be. But some part of me, the part that had raised a child through all his lies and tantrums and fevers, that part knew what hidden shame looked like. I opened it. Inside was a torn paper bag from the same clinic I'd seen on the receipt. Mildred Women's Health. Crumpled tissues. A discarded hospital wristband with Emily's name. And at the bottom, a small information packet. Post-procedure instructions. I stood there for a long moment. The wind brushed my face like a hand trying to ground me, but I was already unraveling. This wasn't speculation anymore. It wasn't even hearsay. It was fact. She had gone through with it, and they'd thrown the evidence away like it meant nothing. I walked back inside, my legs moving without direction. I didn't know whether I felt more rage or more grief, but I knew I couldn't carry both alone much longer. Jason was in the living room working on his laptop like nothing had happened. The sight of him calm-focused made something flare inside me. "Jason?" I said, my voice even. Too even. He looked up. "Hey, I need to talk to you. Privately." He shut the lid. "Okay." I led him to the den and shut the door. Then I placed the bag down on the table between us. He froze. "You threw it away," I said. "Not in the house, of course. Out there. Like you were afraid I'd find it." He didn't speak. I leaned forward. "Do you think I'm stupid?" "No," he said softly. "I just didn't want to hurt you." I laughed bitter sharp. "You think hiding this hurt less?" He looked away, jaw tight. "What do you want me to say, Ma? I want the truth." He ran a hand through his hair. "We didn't plan it. Emily was scared. I told her whatever she decided I'd support her. So this was all hers." His silence betrayed him. "She didn't want to do it, did she?" I pressed. "She said she wasn't ready." "That's not what I asked." His eyes met mine. "She wanted to keep it. At first?" I felt my breath catch. He went on slowly, like dragging truth through tar. "I told her it would change everything, that we weren't stable enough, that she'd lose clients, that I just couldn't handle it." I swallowed. "So you pressured her." "I didn't force her, but you didn't support her either." He stood up suddenly. "You don't know what it's like, Ma. You had me at 22 and you never worked a corporate job. You didn't have a brand to protect or bills stacked up." "No," I said calmly. "I just had a husband in a coma and a baby who needed constant care." "You're right. I don't know pressure." He winced. I softened slightly. "Jason, I would have helped. I would have done anything to support you both. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because we knew you'd try to change her mind." "And you didn't want her mind changed?" I said flatly. He didn't deny it. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan, the shadow of it spinning on the walls like a slow-motion storm. I kept hearing Emily's voice in my head from the hallway that night. I still think about it. Every night. She was grieving. Quietly. Alone. And Jason. Jason was doing everything to pretend nothing happened. I needed to speak to her. Not as his mother, but as a woman. The next morning, I waited until Jason left to run errands. I knocked on the guest room door. "Emily." My voice was soft, cautious. There was a long pause. "Then come in." She was sitting on the bed in a large hoodie, her hair pulled into a loose bun, eyes swollen from crying. "Can I sit?" I asked. She nodded. I sat on the edge of the bed. "I know. About the baby. About everything." She blinked fast, pressing her lips together. "He told you no?" "You did. That night. In the hallway." I heard enough. Her chin trembled. "I'm sorry you had to find out that way." "Don't apologize," I said. "You're not the one who lied to me." She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. I reached over gently. "Emily, did you want the baby tears spilled before she could stop them?" She nodded once, twice, then again and again, like it was the only truth she could hold on to. "I was scared," she whispered. "But I would have kept it. I didn't have anyone in my corner. You had me." Her eyes met mine, wide and wounded. "I didn't know that." My voice broke. "I wish you had." We sat there in silence for a while. Two women. One grieving a future she never got to hold, the other mourning the lie she lived under. "I wish I'd fought harder," she said. "But Jason, he can be persuasive." I nodded. "Yes, he can. And when he shuts something down, it's like it never existed." That line sliced through me. That's exactly what he'd done with the baby. With the truth. With me. I left her with a hug and the promise that she was no longer alone. But as I returned to my room, I knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about the baby anymore. This was about control. About erasure. About power. And Jason? My son was not the man I thought he was. Not anymore. Dinner that night was an exercise in silence. I made roasted chicken and rosemary potatoes, something Jason always loved, but I may as well have served stones. The plate sat mostly untouched, steam curling into the awkward air like it too was trying to escape the tension. Emily sat across from me, her posture, tight gaze glued to her fork. Jason scrolled through his phone as if the glow of the screen could insulate him from the weight of what we all knew but weren't saying out loud. I'd always known how to read a room. It comes from decades of being the quiet one, the listener, the observer. And everything in that dining room screamed one thing: they were trying to out-silence me. But I was done pretending. I cut into my chicken slowly, carefully, like each slice might keep me grounded. "You haven't said much," I finally said, not looking up. Jason didn't respond. "Anything interesting on your phone?" He put it down, annoyed. "Just checking emails." Emily glanced at him quickly, then back at her plate. She hadn't taken a bite. I turned to her. "Emily, how are you feeling?" Her eyes flicked to Jason, then back to me. "Fine. She's fine." Jason echoed, his voice clipped. The table fell quiet again. I set my fork down, gently folding my napkin. The clink of silverware felt like a hammer in that delicate quiet. "I see," I said. "So we're all going to pretend that nothing happened." Jason bristled. "Can we not do this here?" Emily looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. "I think this is exactly where we should do this," I said, my tone calm but unshakable. "Because this isn't just your home, it's mine too. And I deserve to be spoken to like a human being. Not a guest to be kept in the dark." Jason crossed his arms. "We already talked. You said your piece." "I haven't said a word," I said. "Not really. And you haven't listened. Not once." He sat back in his chair, a smirk creeping up. "You want me to apologize, is that it? For protecting my marriage, for making a choice that wasn't about you?" Emily flinched. I stood up slowly, placing my napkin down. "Don't hide behind that word, choice. It's not a shield. Not when you wielded it like a weapon. Mom." "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to interrupt. Not after what you took from me." The room fell into stunned silence. Even the hum of the refrigerator felt louder. I walked around the table and stood next to my chair, every word balanced on the edge of sorrow and fury. "I raised you to be many things," I continued, my voice trembling but rising. "Compassionate, accountable, brave. But I didn't raise you to manipulate a woman into giving up her child just because it made your life more convenient." Jason opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "She wanted that baby. Don't lie. I saw it in her face before you ever said a word." Emily was crying now, silently, hands folded in her lap, like she was praying not to fall apart. Her knuckles were white, clenched tight around her napkin. My heart broke watching her, not just for what she lost, but for how isolated she'd been through it all. "You stood by and let her bleed alone," I said, quieter now, but every syllable laced with hurt. "And you lied to me like I didn't matter." Jason's jaw clenched. "It wasn't your decision. It wasn't your life." "No," I said, nodding. "It wasn't. But it was my grandchild. And I would have mourned with you if you'd let me. Instead, you turned your back and tossed the memory in the trash like it never existed." I turned to Emily, my voice softening. "I'm sorry you were alone. That no one fought for you." She swallowed, tears tracking down her face. Jason stood up abruptly, chair screeching against the tile. "This is insane. This is exactly why we didn't tell you. Because you can't keep your emotions in check." I looked at him and said something I hadn't even realized until the moment it left my lips. "I don't recognize you anymore." He froze, not angry, not defensive, just stunned. Like someone slapped the mask right off his face. I gathered my plate and walked toward the sink. My hands were shaking, but I moved slowly, deliberately, like surrendering control would be worse than breaking. Behind me, I heard his footsteps storm away. The stairs creaked as he disappeared into the hallway above. He didn't say goodbye, didn't even excuse himself. He left the room like it was beneath him. Emily lingered in the kitchen. She didn't speak at first, just stood near the window watching the stars start to prick the sky. The night outside was dark and vast, but her figure in that warm kitchen light, she looked small. Smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Thank you," she said eventually, her voice small, "for not pretending." I turned off the faucet and dried my hands. "You deserve the truth," I said. "And so do I." She turned to face me. "I should have told you. About everything." I nodded slowly. "We're not always brave when we need to be. Sometimes we get braver after." She let out a shaky breath. "I don't know who he is anymore." I stepped toward her. "Neither do I." Her face crumbled then. Not loud sobs, just quiet, broken gasps. I held her arms wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She clung to me like a child. And I thought, maybe this is what motherhood is too, holding the ones your child fails to protect. "You're not alone." "Not now," I whispered. "Not ever again." Later that night, I sat alone in the den with the lights off, watching the shadows move across the walls. The television was off, the wine glass untouched. Just me. Just memory. I thought of that small being no bigger than a plum, no heavier than a whisper, and how they would never know they were loved. How they were never sung to, never celebrated. Only feared. Hidden. Forgotten. I thought of the stories I'd never get to tell, the tiny socks that would never be worn, the lullabies that would stay unsung. And more than anything, I thought of Jason. My boy. The boy who used to sleep with his head in my lap, who used to cry when worms got stepped on in the rain. The boy who once stood up for a classmate with Down syndrome when others teased him. How had that boy grown into this man? Where had I gone wrong? I went upstairs and opened the second bedroom, the one I used to imagine as a nursery. I turned on the light. Everything was still undisturbed. Boxes, old books. A folded Afghan I'd knitted 2 winters ago when I thought they'd tell me I was going to be a grandma. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. It didn't feel like a room anymore. It felt like a grave for hope. An unmarked tomb for the life that would never be. The warmth I used to feel when I stood in that room, that flicker of anticipation, it had gone out like a blown candle. And I cried then, not just for the child, but for the version of myself who used to believe in that light. The next morning, Jason avoided me completely. He left early. No goodbye, no eye contact. But Emily stayed. She made tea for the both of us. We sat together on the porch watching the neighborhood wake up. A dog barked in the distance. A school bus rumbled past. Life kept happening. We didn't speak much, but it was a different kind of silence. Not avoidance, but understanding. Shared weight. She reached for my hand once briefly. Her fingers were cold. Mine wrapped around them without hesitation. It was enough. Enough to know this wasn't over. Enough to know she still needed someone on her side. And enough to know I wasn't done fighting. That morning, as the sun spilled across the lawn, I realized something deeply painful and strangely clarifying. This wasn't just a loss, it was a reckoning. With who my son had become, and with who I would have to become now if I ever wanted to protect what was still left of my heart. The next morning, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Not the kind of peaceful hush that comes with rest or calm. No, this was a silence that felt earned by pain. It wrapped around the walls like fog, making everything feel slightly off. Even the floorboards seemed to creak differently. Jason had left early again. I heard the front door close around 7 and his car pull away without pause. He didn't even make coffee. That alone told me more than words could. He was hiding. From me. From her. From the weight of what he'd done. I found Emily sitting at the kitchen table, her hands cupped around a mug of tea she hadn't touched. Her face looked different. Not just tired, but hollow, like someone who had walked through fire and now wasn't sure how to feel warmth again. I poured myself some coffee and sat down beside her. "You didn't sleep," I said softly. She didn't answer. I waited. Finally, she said, "Do you think it's possible to unsee someone? Like really unsee the version of them you thought was real?" I looked at her for a long moment before replying. "Yes," I said. "But it doesn't happen all at once. It's slow. You start by questioning their tone, then their silences, then the way they look away when you cry. And one day you realize you're grieving someone who's still breathing." She nodded. "I don't know how to stay," she whispered. "But I don't know how to leave either." I understood that too well. I'd stayed with Jason's father far longer than I should have, not because he was cruel, but because he disappeared into himself after his accident. And I kept holding out hope that the man I loved would return. Sometimes love isn't enough to fix a person. Sometimes love makes us the quiet hostage of their refusal to change. Later that day, I took a walk. I needed to get out of the house, to breathe something other than recycled pain. I walked the neighborhood slowly, letting the wind tug at my coat, watching the leaves scuttle across the sidewalks. Everywhere I looked, I saw things I'd once taken comfort in: the tree. Jason used to climb the park bench where I read books while he played the old couple 2 doors down who still held hands. All of it reminded me of the life I thought I'd built, the legacy I thought I was passing on. Instead, I felt like a character who'd outlived her script. When I returned home, I found something unexpected. A notebook, left open on the living room couch. Emily's handwriting. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But I did. It wasn't a diary, not exactly, more like a journal of fears and questions, scribbled fragments of thoughts, pages torn out and folded back in. One sentence jumped out like a scream on a whispering page. I wanted to keep it. I begged him to let me, but he said it would ruin our life. Like the baby was a storm and I was just the sky he needed to keep clear. My knees gave slightly and I sat down. I turned the pages slowly, gently, as if afraid they might break. Another line: weeks earlier, I thought if I did what he wanted, he'd love me more. But now he barely looks at me. And then, he says, I'm lucky he stayed. That other men would have left me for wanting it in the first place. I closed the notebook. Not because I was done, but because I wasn't sure I could handle another word without doing something reckless. That evening, I waited until Jason came home. He walked in with a plastic bag from the grocery store and his phone glued to his ear. I waited. Let him finish. He saw me, nodded briefly, and went to put things away. Sit, I said before he could escape again. He hesitated. I have a call. No, you don't, I said sharply. Not now. He dropped the bag on the counter and sighed, setting his phone down with exaggerated annoyance. What? Now, Ma? I walked over and placed the notebook on the table. He stared at it. You read her journal? I didn't mean to. But I did. Unbelievable, he muttered. That's a violation. No, I said, stepping forward, voice rising. You want to talk about violation? Let's talk about what you did to her. What you talked her into. What you convinced her was love. He went silent. She begged you, I said, shaking. She begged you to let her keep that baby. He looked away. You gaslit her into thinking she wasn't ready. That she wasn't capable. That a child was a burden, not a blessing. His voice was low now. It wasn't the right time. It was never going to be the right time for you, I snapped. Because you didn't want anything to inconvenience you. You wanted her neat and perfect and quiet. And when she didn't agree, you buried her with words until she caved. That's not fair. You told her other men would leave her, I hissed. Is that fair? Jason looked at me with a mixture of guilt and defiance. I didn't mean it like that. But you said it. He rubbed his forehead, pacing. Look, I was scared too. Okay, it's not just on me. You don't get to share the blame now that the damage is done, I said. You created this mess. And then you made her clean it up. Alone. We stood there both breathing hard. Years of love and trust unraveling like thread between us. I used to be proud of you, I said, quieter now. I used to think you were the kind of man I'd want my grandchildren to look up to. He didn't respond. I don't feel that anymore. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. But I wasn't finished. That night, Emily knocked on my bedroom door. I let her in. She sat on the edge of my bed, hands folded. I'm going to leave him, she said. I looked at her. Are you sure? She nodded. I've been sure for a while. I just needed someone else to see it. To believe me. You don't owe him anything, I said. Tears filled her eyes. Not even forgiveness. Forgiveness is a gift, not an obligation, and it should never cost you your dignity. She exhaled slowly, like someone finally stepping off a ledge they'd been standing on far too long. Will you help me pack? She asked. I reached over and held her hand. Yes. We packed the next morning while Jason was at work. She didn't take much, just the essentials. A suitcase, a box of personal things, a framed photo from a hiking trip, her journal. Before she left, she placed a small envelope on the kitchen table. For him, she nodded. For me. I didn't ask what it said. She hugged me tightly, longer than before. And then she was gone. That night, the house felt emptier than it ever had, and yet somehow lighter. Jason came home and saw her things missing. He stormed through the house, then stopped when he found the letter. He didn't open it while I was in the room. I didn't ask. We sat in silence for the rest of the night. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like his mother. I felt like a woman who had raised someone she no longer knew. The next morning, Jason was gone. No note. No sound. Just the faint trace of his cologne lingering in the hallway and the front door left slightly ajar. I didn't chase after him. Not this time. For once, I let the silence speak. I sat in the kitchen with my tea going cold, staring at the envelope Emily had left behind. It was still sealed, resting like a landmine on the table, small, white, and quiet. I considered throwing it away, burning it, leaving it untouched for eternity. But curiosity is a cruel thing. I reached for it with careful fingers and turned it over. No name on the front. Just a small pressed corner and her clean, deliberate handwriting inside. I didn't open it. It wasn't meant for me. But I held it a moment longer than I should have, trying to feel the weight of her words through paper, trying to imagine what you write to the man who made you end something you loved. A final goodbye. A confession. A curse. I tucked it under a stack of mail. He'd find it when he decided to come home. If he came home. The house was quieter than usual. Not just empty, silent. The kind of silence that feels deliberate, like a waiting room before a diagnosis. You know something's coming, but you don't know if it's healing or heartbreak. I wandered through the rooms like a ghost. The den where we used to have family game nights before the tension made even Scrabble feel like a courtroom. The stairs where Jason once slid down in a sleeping bag, laughing until he nearly broke a leg. The second bedroom where I'd stopped imagining a crib. I opened the closet in there and pulled down the small storage box I hadn't touched in months. Inside were the items I'd collected quietly over the years. Baby books, a tiny pair of socks, a onesie that said Grandma's favorite, a lullaby CD, soft, simple things, symbols of a dream I'd tried to manifest into existence with love alone. I sat on the floor and ran my fingers over the socks. My chest ached, but I didn't cry. I'd cried too much already. Instead, I whispered, I would have loved you. So much. And then I closed the box. This time, not with hope, but with goodbye. The next few days passed slowly. Jason didn't call. Emily didn't return. It felt like the house had finally exhaled and all that remained was the debris of truth. No illusions, no warmth. Just the hollow sound of honesty settling in the walls. On the third night my phone rang. Jason. For a moment I didn't recognize the number. He called from his office line, probably thought I wouldn't pick up if I saw his name. I answered, voice flat. Yes, silence. Then she's gone. I know. She left me. She did. He let out a shaky breath, the kind that almost sounded like a sob, but not quite. I didn't think she'd actually go. Then you never understood what you were doing to her. Another long silence. She said you helped her. I did, I said. Because she needed help. And you weren't giving it. He went quiet again. Then with unexpected vulnerability he asked, Do you hate me? I closed my eyes. No, I said honestly, but I don't know how to love you the same way anymore. He said nothing. Just a soft, broken exhale. I miss the man I thought you were, I added. I miss him too, he whispered. And then he hung up. That night, I sat outside on the back porch wrapped in an old quilt. The stars were dim behind thin clouds. The wind smelled like rain. I thought about forgiveness. People think it's a grand act, a sermon-worthy gesture. But sometimes it's just not calling someone back. Not chasing them down to fix what they refuse to admit is broken. Sometimes forgiveness isn't letting someone off the hook. It's letting yourself off theirs. I wrapped the blanket tighter and whispered into the night, I forgive you, Jason. But I can't forget. The next morning, Emily came back not to stay, but to talk. She stood at the front door holding a small gift bag and a coffee. I thought you might want to go for a walk, she said. We walked in silence for a while, just two women moving through a quiet neighborhood. I noticed the way her shoulders slowly relaxed, the way her breath evened out. She was healing piece by piece. I told my mom, she said eventually, about everything. How did she take it? She cried. But she told me she was proud of me. For leaving. You should be proud of you too, I said. She glanced at me. You know, I thought I'd feel empty. But I don't. I feel open. Like maybe I get to start over now. I nodded. That's not emptiness, that's space. She smiled softly. We sat on a bench in the park near the elementary school where I used to teach. The children were out for recess, their laughter echoing across the grass. Emily reached into the gift bag and handed me something small, a delicate bracelet with a single charm, a tiny pair of wings. For the baby, she said. Tears filled my eyes, hot and sudden. Thank you, I whispered, my voice cracking. I wanted you to have something, she said, because you lost something too. I squeezed her hand. In that moment, we were no longer mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. We were women, survivors, witnesses to each other's pain. That afternoon, I placed the bracelet in the baby box, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a symbol of what we found in the wreckage. Strength, truth, connection. Jason didn't come home that week. He sent a few short texts. Nothing emotional, just logistical. Bills, mail, the lease. I answered only when necessary. He needed space to face himself. Alone. I'd done enough carrying. Now it was his turn. One night, I found myself sitting in the kitchen flipping through old photo albums. Jason at 5 wearing a dinosaur costume. Jason at 10 holding a science fair ribbon. Jason at 17 grinning in his cap and gown. He used to be so full of light. Maybe that light is still there, buried beneath pride and fear and poor choices. Maybe not. But I can't keep waiting for it to return. I closed the album and stood up. There's a difference between giving up and letting go. I wasn't giving up on Jason. I was letting go of who I needed him to be. But letting go isn't easy. It comes in waves. Some nights I still stand in the hallway listening for his footsteps. Some mornings I reach for 2 coffee mugs instead of 1. That muscle memory of love, it doesn't vanish. It resists. But now I let that resistance sit beside me. I let it speak. And then I tell it gently. Not today. Because today I need peace, more than illusion. A few days later, a letter arrived. It was Jason's handwriting. A single page. Handwritten. No return address. Ma, I've been thinking. About everything. About who I am. About who I was. I don't know how I got here. I used to believe I was kind, that I was better than the men who hurt people. But I see now, maybe I wasn't better. Maybe I just knew how to hide my selfishness better. I broke something in Emily. I see that now. And I broke something in you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect a reply. But I needed to say it. I'm sorry. Jason. I read it twice, then a third time. The words weren't enough to fix anything, but they were a beginning. A breadcrumb of truth left in the woods between us. I folded the letter and placed it beside the bracelet. One for the child we lost. One for the child I still hoped might one day return. Not as he was, but as someone who finally knew how to hold love gently. The air had changed. Not outside, inside me. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with a flash of insight or a thunderous emotional revelation. It was quieter than that. Like the way autumn arrives slowly, one leaf at a time, until one day you realize the entire landscape has changed and you didn't even notice. That was me, a woman in transition, no longer defined by waiting or hoping or grieving alone, but still, not entirely healed. Jason didn't return. Not yet. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I wanted him to. That thought alone would have horrified me a year ago, the idea of not wanting my son around. But after everything, the distance felt necessary. Healthy even. It wasn't punishment. It was protection for me, for Emily, and maybe, just maybe, for him too. Because Jason needed to sit with himself, without me smoothing over the sharp edges, without Emily absorbing the impact. He needed to hear his own voice in an empty room. I began to fill my days. Not with distractions, with meaning. The Women's Center became a second home. I volunteered twice a week, sometimes more. It started small, filing folders, making tea, cleaning up after meetings. But soon they began asking me to sit in, to listen, to support. I never gave advice. I just offered presence. The kind of quiet, steady presence I wished Emily had during her loneliest moments. Some of the women were barely out of high school. Some were grandmothers. Some were mothers already overwhelmed, uncertain, carrying the guilt of wanting more for themselves. And every one of them had a story. One woman, Camille, sat with me for 2 hours one afternoon. She didn't say a word at first. Just cried, shoulders trembling beneath a worn cardigan. When she finally spoke, it came out in pieces. He told her she wasn't enough. That the baby would ruin everything. That no one would help her. She said, I used to be loud. Now I feel like I'm whispering all the time. I told her something I hadn't told anyone, not even Emily. That's how you know your soul is still alive, I said. Because even a whisper carries truth. She cried harder. But this time, it was different. Not devastation. Release. I came home that evening to a quiet house, the kind that used to feel empty but now felt sacred. I made tea, lit a candle, sat with my grief, and didn't ask it to leave. That's the thing about pain. When you stop trying to push it away, it softens. Not right away, but eventually it loses its teeth. One night I received a message. Not from Jason. From his first girlfriend. Melissa. I hadn't spoken to her in over a decade. She said she heard what happened through mutual friends, through whispers. And she was sorry. But more than that, she wanted to thank me. I always felt like something was wrong with me, she wrote. Back then when I ended the pregnancy. But hearing what Emily went through, It made me realize I wasn't crazy. He pushed me too. He made it feel like keeping the baby would make me unlovable. Like I was selfish for wanting it. I didn't know what to say. I stared at the screen for a long time, a strange tightness in my chest. This was bigger than I realized. Jason's fear hadn't started with Emily. It had roots. Control doesn't sprout overnight. It grows quietly over time, watered by entitlement, fed by avoidance. And I had missed it all. The next morning, I went into Jason's childhood room. Everything was still there. The bookshelf, the baseball trophies, the science posters. I hadn't changed it. I never could. I sat on the edge of his old bed and looked around. For the first time, I didn't see the boy I raised. I saw the cracks. The times I'd overlooked his subtle dominance, his tendency to talk over others, his fear of vulnerability, his charm that could wrap around someone's insecurity and gently tighten without them noticing. Had I coddled that? Had I mistaken control for confidence? I felt my stomach twist. I had raised a man who didn't know how to share power, a man who mistook silence for agreement. And that failure, that was mine to hold. I didn't drown in guilt. Not this time. But I did sit with it. Let it settle into my bones. Not to punish myself, but to remind myself of my responsibility. Not everything Jason did was my fault, but I had given him the tools. And now I had to reckon with what he built with them. That afternoon, Emily called. Her voice was lighter. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "I started therapy." I smiled. "I'm proud of you. I'm proud of me too." She paused. "I also signed the lease on a new apartment. Small, but full of windows." "That sounds perfect." She hesitated. "I left the bracelet on the windowsill," she said. "So it gets the best light." I blinked back tears. "That's exactly where it belongs." I told her about Melissa's message. Emily didn't seem surprised. "He has a pattern," she said. "People do," I replied, "until they're forced to look at it." "Do you think he's looking now?" I was quiet. "I don't know," I said, "but I think for the first time, he can't look away." That evening, I began writing a letter. To Jason. Not to accuse, not to attack, but to tell my truth. I didn't finish it. Not yet. But I started. "You once told me I was your safe place, and I tried to be. Every day. But safety doesn't mean silence, and love, real love, doesn't protect you from consequence. I still love you. But I won't protect you from yourself anymore. If you want to come back into my life, really come back, it has to be as someone willing to unlearn everything that hurt us." I folded the page, set it on my nightstand, and turned out the light. That night, I dreamt of the baby. I never saw their face, but I heard laughter light bright like wind chimes. And in the dream, I wasn't mourning. I was holding their hand, walking beside them through a garden full of daffodils. No words, just warmth, just peace. When I woke, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Not happiness exactly, but clarity. Like I was finally ready to stop grieving what wasn't and start building what could still be. My story wasn't over. It was just turning a sharp, necessary corner, and as painful as it had been, I was still walking, still whispering truth, still here. When I stepped into the women's center that morning, the air smelled like citrus and printer toner. The receptionist gave me a soft smile and I nodded, clutching the files I'd volunteered to organize. But even as I busied my hands, my mind was elsewhere. Emily's voice echoed in my thoughts from our last phone call. "I think he's unraveling. I don't know what that means yet." Unraveling. It was the right word. Because that's what happens when you start pulling the threads of control one by one. Everything a person's built begins to fall apart. Not because the truth is so devastating, but because the illusion was built so delicately. And Jason, his illusion had been curated for years. Smart, stable, supportive, just uncertain about kids. But now we knew the truth. He was a man terrified of losing power, and when that fear collided with another person's freedom, he made sure he was the one who survived the impact. I spent the morning sorting resource packets for young mothers, filing brochures about counseling services, prenatal care, emergency shelters. I'd seen women walk in with every kind of story, but what always hit me hardest were the women who came in alone, not just without a partner, but without anyone. No sister, no friend, no parent. Just silence walking beside them like a shadow. That had been Emily once. And now I was watching her rise out of that shadow step by trembling step. Around noon, I was asked to join a support circle. They didn't always ask volunteers to sit in, but today they needed an extra listener. Not a therapist, just a steady presence. I sat in the circle of chairs, nodding quietly at the women gathered around. Some made eye contact, others didn't. One young woman, no more than 19, clutched a knitted hat in her hands like it was a life vest. They went around the circle sharing. Not everything, just pieces. Stories, pauses, regrets. Then the girl with the knitted hat spoke. I was told I had to choose, him or the baby. Her voice was soft, flat. No one said those words exactly, but it was clear. He stopped looking at me, started sleeping on the couch, called me dramatic. She swallowed hard, and I didn't want to lose him. My chest tightened. She looked up, eyes glistening, but I lost both. The room was silent. I reached forward gently and said only one thing. You are not the mistake. The silence was. She nodded, eyes wide. Later that day, I walked past a mirror in the hallway and almost didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked different, though the lines around my mouth had deepened and my eyes seemed more tired than I remembered. It was something else. A presence. A weight. Not grief. Power. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just full. I'd spent so many years being careful, quiet, useful. The type of mother who didn't interfere, the type of woman who didn't demand space, the type of family member who kept peace even if it hurt. But now I had stopped making myself small. When I got home that evening, there was a package on the doorstep. No name, just my address written in Jason's handwriting. Inside was a book, a parenting book. The same one I had gifted him 3 years ago, wrapped in a golden ribbon. The one he never opened. He'd laughed when I gave it to him. We're not there yet, Ma, he said. This time the ribbon was gone. The corners were worn. Inside the front cover he'd written just one line I finally started reading. I see now what I missed. I held the book against my chest and closed my eyes. Progress. Not redemption. Not yet. But progress. The next day, Emily called again. I got a job, she said. A good one. The kind that makes me nervous. She laughed. But yeah, it feels right. I imagined her in her new apartment, bright windows, clean walls, sunlight on her face. You deserve all of it, I said. She was quiet for a beat. Then I'm thinking of going back to the clinic. Not as a patient, as a speaker. I felt my breath catch. To tell my story, she continued. Not the trauma, the decision to walk away. The healing. I want women to know they're not crazy for mourning something they were told to forget. You'll help a lot of people. She hesitated. I want to help me too. That evening, I sat down to finally finish the letter to Jason. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I didn't protect him from the impact of his actions. But I also didn't shame him. I told him the truth. About the little boy he used to be. The man he'd become. And the road he still had to walk, if he ever wanted to be someone I could welcome back into my heart. I told him that healing wasn't a performance, that remorse without repair is still manipulation, and that I was willing to listen if he was willing to change. The next morning, I mailed it. I stood at the mailbox longer than I needed to, fingers resting on the cold metal handle. Then I let it go. That's the thing about boundaries. They're not built to keep people out. They're built to teach others how to come in right. Weeks passed. No grand apology, no dramatic return. But I began to notice things shifting. Jason emailed once a long message about his sessions with a therapist, about learning to recognize coercion, about unlearning toxic masculinity. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He didn't ask for anything. He simply shared his process. And for the first time, I believed him. Then one morning, I received a card in the mail. Emily's handwriting. Inside was a photo, a small clay sculpture. 2 hands, one adult, one tiny, reaching toward each other. On the back she had written, "Healing is still possible between what we held and what we lost." I wept, not from sadness, from awe, because I was witnessing something I never thought I'd see again: resurrection. Not of the past, but of the self. And maybe that's the most sacred thing of all, when a woman comes back to herself, when she reclaims her name, her voice, her shape, when she stops shrinking for someone else's comfort, and starts growing for her own freedom. I hadn't planned a dinner. It was supposed to be a quiet night, a simple roast chicken, carrots, a glass of wine. But then Emily called. "I'll be near your neighborhood tomorrow," she said. Could I stop by? Something in her voice, calm, hesitant, made me say, "Why don't you stay for dinner?" She hesitated. "Okay, I'd like that." I didn't ask if she wanted Jason invited. She didn't ask either. The next day, I set the table with the ceramic plates she'd once complimented. Not the china that felt too formal, too full of ghosts. I lit 2 candles, opened the window to let the fall air drift through. When she arrived, she was carrying a small box. "Apple tart," she said, smiling nervously. "From the bakery we always passed but never stopped in. It's perfect." Something about her seemed sturdier, lighter, like she'd finally stopped shrinking. We talked easily: her new job, her podcast idea, even her apartment. She was building something hers. Then after a pause, she said, "Jason reached out." My fork paused midair. He asked to meet for coffee. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. "What do you want to do?" I asked. She sighed. "I don't know. Part of me wants to scream. Another part wants closure." I nodded. "That's not weakness. That's clarity finding its footing." She smiled. "That's what my therapist says too." Dinner ended softly. As she left, I walked her to the door. "Thank you," she said. "Tonight felt normal. You're always welcome here, with or without him." She hugged me, then added almost to herself, "I think I'm ready to stop apologizing for what I needed." I squeezed her hand. Good. Never apologize for surviving. Later that night, while washing dishes, my thoughts circled back to Jason. Not with anger this time, but with that hollow ache only a mother can feel when she realizes her child has become a stranger. Would he own it? Would he deflect? I didn't know anymore, but I found myself hoping, and that surprised me. The next morning, I sat in the garden sipping tea. The air was crisp, the leaves scattered like gold. That's when I got his message. "Can I come by tonight? Just to talk." I stared at it for a long moment, then typed back, "Come after 7. He arrived at 7:13. His coat was wrinkled, his eyes tired, but his voice was soft. "Hi, Ma. Come in." We sat across from each other, tea between us. "I'm not here to fix anything," he said. "I just need to be accountable, even if it's too late." I didn't speak. I was scared. Not of the baby. Of losing control. Of not knowing who I'd become. I nodded. "And you made your fear into a prison. For both of you." He flinched, but didn't deny it. "I know," he whispered. "And I'm sorry." He pulled a paper from his pocket and handed it to me. A list. 3 columns. What I believed. What I said. What I understand now. I scanned the first line. Belief a baby would trap me. What I said, we're not ready. Understanding I was afraid of losing the version of myself that felt in control. I looked at him. He was open. Not defensive. Not performative. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said. Just to be seen. I exhaled. You were always seen, Jason. But you weren't always honest about what I was looking at. He nodded. I told him about Melissa, the message she sent, how she had once felt forced into a decision she didn't fully want. Jason bowed his head. I thought I buried all that. But it didn't stay buried. No, I said. Because what follows you is what you refuse to face. His shoulders slumped. I'm tired of hiding. Then stop, I said. But know this healing isn't about being liked again. It's about becoming someone different. We sat in silence. Then I added, I'm not ready to forgive, but I'm ready to watch. If you're ready to really change. He nodded slowly, eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in him for a long time. Humility. I want to try, he said. Then don't tell me, I said. Show me. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But when he left, I felt something shift. Not repair. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of something honest, not beautiful, but real. Jason didn't call for days after our conversation. He didn't text either. And strangely, I wasn't anxious. I didn't pace by the phone or reread our last exchange. I didn't interpret the silence as rejection or backsliding. I simply waited, calmly. Because I'd said what needed saying, and now it was up to him to choose his next step. When you stop trying to manage someone's change, you begin reclaiming your own. I spent the weekend at the Women's Center again. Camille, the young woman I'd sat with a few weeks ago, had returned. This time she brought a friend. And they weren't crying. They were holding each other up, walking a little straighter, staying through the entire support group instead of slipping out early. I watched them from across the room and smiled. Sometimes strength is quiet. It doesn't roar, it roots. Later, I sat at my kitchen table writing in my notebook. I wasn't sure what it was becoming, a memoir maybe, or a series of letters I'd never send. Each page was a small unraveling of illusions, of guilt, of the role I thought I had to play. I used to think being a good mother meant protecting Jason at all costs. But now I know. It means holding him accountable, even if he doesn't thank me for it. On Monday morning, Emily texted he asked to meet. I said yes. My hand stilled on my coffee mug. I typed back, "Do you feel ready?" Her reply came almost instantly. "I feel clear. Whatever he says, I know who I am now." That was all I needed to hear. They met that evening at a cafe downtown. I didn't ask for a play-by-play. I didn't wait up. I just lit a candle near my window and whispered a prayer, not for reconciliation but for clarity. Let her leave with her dignity untouched. Let him speak from truth, not strategy. Let the silence between them be honest, not manipulative. The next morning she called. Her voice was calm. "It was weird," she said. "He tried to explain everything. He cried a little." "Did you believe him?" I asked. "Yes. And no. I think he believes himself, but he's still learning the difference between guilt and responsibility." I felt my chest rise with quiet pride. You spoke your truth, every word. And do you feel finished? Not finished, but free. That night, Jason called me. "I just wanted to say thanks," he said, "for listening, for calling me out, for not giving up." "I did give up," I said gently. "But that doesn't mean I stopped loving you. It just means I stopped enabling you." He was silent a moment. "Emily's stronger than I remembered." "She was always strong," I said. "You just couldn't see it from the height of your fear." He exhaled. "I want to be different." then be. Quietly, consistently. Not for her. Not even for me. For you. After we hung up, I sat in the dark and let the stillness settle around me like a blanket. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't grieving. I wasn't waiting. I was simply at peace. Not because everything was fixed, but because I had stopped trying to fix what didn't belong to me. The next day, I returned to the garden and clipped a small white rose that had bloomed late. I placed it in a glass jar beside Emily's bracelet. Because healing doesn't come all at once. It arrives in fragments, in text messages and whispered truths, in tearful coffees and accountability lists, in the quiet courage of a woman choosing not to carry what isn't hers. The days that followed were slow like breathing after a long run. Emily didn't talk much about the coffee with Jason anymore. Not because it hadn't mattered, but because it no longer defined her. That chapter had been read aloud, absorbed, and shelved. Instead, we spoke of her new podcast. She had a name for it now, Quiet Fire. It's about women who lost their voices, she told me one morning over tea, and what it takes to get them back. Not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly. I told her the name was perfect. You know, she said, I was worried no one would listen. That no one cared. But you still chose to speak, I said. That's what makes it brave. One afternoon, I walked into Jason's old room. Not for any reason, just instinct. It was still a time capsule. Baseball posters, stacks of books from college, a dusty guitar. But I wasn't sentimental anymore. I opened the closet, pulled out a box labeled Misc, and began sorting. Inside were old report cards, loose photos, and one sealed envelope with my name written in his handwriting. No stamp. Just hidden. I sat on the bed and opened it. Inside was a short note. I don't know when I'll be someone you can be proud of again. But I know now that I lost something I never truly valued. And that's on me. It wasn't an apology. Not exactly. But it was honest. I folded the letter back and tucked it away in my journal. The next morning, I went to the center early. Camille was there again, setting up chairs. She smiled when she saw me. Guess who applied for the peer support program? You. She nodded, her grin radiant. I want to help the next girl who thinks she's too broken to speak. I nearly cried. Look at you, I whispered. Look at who you're becoming. Thanks to people like you, she said. But I shook my head. No. You did this. I just reminded you it was possible. Emily invited me to her apartment for lunch that weekend. It was small but bright, just as she'd described. Light spilled through the windows, warming the hardwood floors. Plants curled toward the sun. Her kitchen was cluttered in the way only real homes are. She'd framed a photo of the bracelet and placed it on a shelf beside her books. Over sandwiches, she said, he asked if we could try being siblings again. Just that. No expectations. And I told him maybe. Not now, but maybe. I nodded. That's fair. It's not about being close, she said. It's about being safe. I'll never make myself small for someone else again. I felt something settle inside me. My daughter-in-law was no longer surviving. She was leading. As I left, I noticed a piece of paper taped to her fridge. A quote. Forgiveness is not for the person who hurt you. It's for the person you're becoming. I didn't need to ask where she found it. It had lived inside her all along. Back home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window. Jason had begun texting once a week. Not long messages, just check-ins. They weren't performative, just present. And I realized something: redemption isn't a grand gesture. It's showing up without being asked. It's staying when the applause has stopped. It's rebuilding the bridge even when no one promises to cross it. I stepped into the garden and trimmed back the last of the roses. Winter would come soon. The soil would harden. The branches would sleep. But underneath, life would continue. Quietly. Unseen. And eventually, bloom again. I always thought closure would arrive like a final page signed, sealed, silent. But that's not how it works. Closure isn't something handed to you. It's something you build. Slowly. With raw hands and a quiet heart. Brick by emotional brick. And on a chilly Sunday morning, I finally felt it forming, not with Jason, but with myself. Emily was invited to speak at a community panel about reproductive healing. The Women's Center had partnered with a local college, and they asked if I wanted to attend. I sat in the third row. I watched her walk up to the microphone with no notes, no script, just that fire she thought she'd lost. Her voice was calm but certain. She didn't name names. She didn't point fingers. She simply told her story, the choice that wasn't a choice, the silence, the guilt, the loneliness, and eventually the moment she decided to reclaim herself. And when she was done, the room didn't clap right away. They breathed with her. That collective breath, that acknowledgement said more than applause ever could. Afterward in the hallway, I hugged her. "You were brilliant." She smiled. "I wasn't trying to be. That's what made it real." Behind her, Jason stood quietly. He'd come. Alone. Unannounced. I didn't even know he knew. He approached slowly as if walking through fog. He looked at Emily. "That was powerful," he said softly. She studied him, her face unreadable. "I didn't do it for you." "I know," he said. "And I didn't say everything. Because some things aren't meant for public healing. Some things are mine to carry and release on my own time." He nodded. "Thank you for letting me listen." She turned away without another word. Not out of cruelty, out of completion. We stepped outside into the sharp air. Jason walked beside me. "I've been volunteering," he said, "at a mentorship program. For teenage boys." I looked at him. "What are you teaching them? To ask hard questions, to sit in discomfort, to talk about fear without turning it into control. And are you still learning that yourself?" He smiled. "Every single day." We stopped at my car. "Do you hate me, Ma?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "I don't hate you. But I don't protect the version of you I used to. That's the difference." He looked down. "That's fair." That night, I wrote in my journal, "Closure is not always peace. Sometimes it's just the quiet after the storm. The moment you stop needing the apology to come gift-wrapped. The moment you begin trusting your own healing more than their regret." Emily called later. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I am," I said. I feel emptied out. In a good way. Like your story finally belongs to you." "Yes." I stepped outside before bed. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees like they were letting go of something too. I thought of the child who never arrived, the one who existed only in memory in the space between silence and truth. And I whispered to them, "I remember you. And I will carry your light in how I show up for others." Sometimes grief stays. It becomes part of the furniture in your soul. But sometimes it turns into a door. And if you're brave enough, you walk through it. Into a version of yourself you never thought you'd survive to meet. Emily came over the next morning with coffee and a quiet look on her face. Not tense, not burdened, just reflective. She sat at the kitchen table and traced the rim of her mug with her finger for a long time before saying, "I don't think I'm angry anymore." I looked up. "That's not because I forgive him," she added. "It's because I finally released myself." Her words settled in the air between us like steam rising from her cup. We walked in the garden after breakfast, crunching through the last of the fallen leaves. The roses had faded, the soil hardened, but the roots were still deep. Waiting. Resting. He asked if I'd ever want to rebuild anything, she said as we paused beneath the arbor. Friendship? Siblinghood? Something. And what did you say? That it's not about rebuilding. It's about whether he can plant something new. something that doesn't require me to sacrifice myself. I smiled. She got it now. Fully. Jason texted me that afternoon. Just a photo of a stack of books: psychology, gender studies, a memoir about reproductive loss. This is the syllabus I never had. Trying to catch up. There was no need for a reply. The effort spoke for itself. Growth isn't loud, it's persistent. The next weekend we met at the community garden where I used to volunteer years ago. Jason showed up early, already elbow deep in soil sleeves, rolled up sweat on his brow. "Helps me think," he said, handing me a trowel. We worked in silence, just like when he was little, planting bulbs, pulling weeds, pausing only to share an observation about the sky or the dirt. Eventually he said, "Did I ruin everything?" I looked at the patch of earth between us. Small green shoots were pushing through. "No," I said. "But what comes next is up to you. Not anyone else. Just you." He nodded. "Emily deserves peace. She's already found it," I said. "Now it's your turn." That evening I found the old ultrasound photo in the back of my dresser. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because even a brief life deserves to be remembered. I lit a candle beside it. Not in mourning. In honor. Not of what was lost, but what it taught us. Later that week, Camille from the Women's Center called me. "They want to feature your story, yours and Emily's, at the next fundraising gala," she said. "Would you be willing to speak?" I hesitated. I had been the quiet one in this story, the one behind the curtain, the mother, the witness, the slow learner. But maybe it was time. Maybe silence once chosen for survival could now be broken for strength. "Yes," I said. "I think I'm ready." That night I wrote my speech. Not polished, not pretty, but real. This is a story about silence and what happens when women finally walk out of it. This is not just about one abortion, one family, or one man. It's about every time a woman was told her pain was overreaction, every time a mother chose peace over truth, and then changed her mind. I paused, then wrote the last line: "It's never too late to choose differently, even if your voice shakes." The journey wasn't over, but for the first time the path ahead didn't feel like rubble. It felt like soil, something I could step into and grow. The auditorium was dimly lit, filled with soft murmurs and the clinking of coffee cups. Faces turned expectantly toward the stage. I stood just behind the curtain, palms damp, breath steady but slow. Emily sat in the front row, her legs crossed, chin lifted. Jason wasn't far behind, quieter, more uncertain but present. Camille gave me a thumbs up from the sidelines. I stepped onto the stage. "I never thought I'd speak about this," I began. "Not publicly, not as a mother, and especially not as a woman who once believed silence was strength." The microphone picked up every tremble in my voice. I thought my role was to hold the family together, to protect peace. But I learned painfully that sometimes peace is just fear dressed in manners. The crowd stilled. I told them about Emily, about the truth she had carried alone, about the betrayal that wore the face of someone we both loved, about the decision I made to stop shielding my son, not out of anger but love. Love that had matured into accountability. I spoke about grief. Not just for a grandchild never born, but for the version of myself that waited too long to ask hard questions. And then I ended with this: "My voice may have arrived late, but it arrived. And if you're sitting here wondering whether yours still matters, I promise you it does. It's not too late to speak. It's never too late to choose truth over comfort." Applause rose soft at first, then fuller. When I stepped down, Camille hugged me with tears in her eyes. You don't know how many women needed to hear that. Maybe. But I knew one woman who did. Me. Later, as we left the building, Emily slipped her arm through mine. "I was proud of you," she said. "You taught me how to be brave," I said. Jason walked a few steps behind us. At one point, he caught up. "You were amazing, Ma," he said. I didn't say thank you, not out of coldness, but because this wasn't about affirmation anymore. It was about truth. I meant every word I said, even the ones that hurt. He nodded. I know. That night I sat on my porch under the stars, a blanket around my shoulders. The candle beside me flickered, the same one I'd once lit for the baby we never knew. But tonight it wasn't a candle of mourning. It was one of memory and transformation. I whispered into the wind. You mattered. Not just in being, but in what your absence revealed. You cracked something open. And from that fracture, we grew. Closure didn't come like a door slamming shut. It came like a window slowly opening. And for the first time in a long time, I let the air in. The morning after the gala, everything was still. No phone buzzed, no new revelations surfaced. It was just me standing at my kitchen window watching golden light drip across the counter like honey. And yet, I felt different. Not like someone who had won, but someone who had endured and emerged. Emily called later that morning. Sleeping in, I teased. I'm exhausted, she laughed. But it's the good kind. We spoke for nearly an hour about the speech about Camille, about the whispers of women who had come up to her afterward with stories they'd never shared before. Do you think healing ever finishes? She asked me. I thought for a long moment. I don't think healing is a place, I said. It's a way of walking. Some days you limp, other days you dance. But either way, you keep moving. She was quiet. Then she whispered, I think I'm ready to move forward. Really forward. Jason texted me that afternoon. Would you like to have dinner this week? Just us. I said yes. Not because I wanted to pretend everything was fine, but because I had learned choosing to see someone clearly flaws and all is not the same as forgetting what they've done. It's simply a choice not to be controlled by it anymore. Dinner was quiet. He spoke less, but what he said mattered more. He asked about the garden. He asked about Emily, not with possession but curiosity. He asked if I thought he'd ever deserve a second chance. I told him, that's not for me to answer. That's something you earn with time, not requests. He nodded. He understood. As I walked him to the door, he turned and said, I miss who I used to be. And I replied, then become someone better. He didn't flinch. He just smiled. I'm working on it. That night, I sat with my journal and wrote the final page. This story was never about an abortion. It was about what we do when silence breaks. About what truth costs and what it gives back. About a woman who thought she had to choose between her son and what was right, and who finally realized there's no love in protecting someone from their own reflection. I lit one last candle for the child who never arrived, not because I was mourning, but because I was remembering. And in that remembrance, I felt the echo of something sacred: hope. Not the naive kind, the rooted kind, the kind that grows from broken soil. If you've made it to this point, maybe you've carried your own silence, your own buried truth. Maybe you've chosen peace over pain and now wonder if it was worth the cost. Let me tell you, it's never too late to speak. And even if your voice shakes, speak anyway. Because what waits on the other side of truth is freedom.